Dawn broke over the Wyoming mountains like a hesitant peace treaty, and Silas Boone greeted it the same way he had for 10 years, alone, armed, and searching the horizon for threats that never came. Steam rose from his tin cup as he surveyed his domain from the cabin porch. The locals called him Iron Boone, a name earned in blood during a feud most had forgotten, but none would mention to his face. He preferred the silence of these heights to the whispers below. His scarred fingers traced the worn stock of his rifle, a habit born of violent memories. The spring thaw meant supplies were running low. He'd need to venture into town, endure the stares and fear. 10 years a hermit, 10 years a beast in their eyes. Silas drained his coffee, decision made. One quick trip, then back to solitude. He couldn't know the woman at today's auction would change everything. The mountain gave Silas peace for a decade, but peace isn't the same as healing. What happens when a man who's chosen isolation suddenly finds himself protecting a stranger? Can two wounded souls forge something stronger than their scars? Comment below with what you think might drive a man to become a mountain hermit, and what might bring him back to humanity. Like if you believe some connections are worth the risk they bring, and subscribe for more tales where second chances come in unexpected forms. Dawn broke over the Wyoming mountains like a hesitant peace treaty, and Silas Boone greeted it the same way he had for 10 years, alone, armed, and searching the horizon for threats that never came. The spring thaw had begun to loosen winter's grip, sending melted snow gurgling down rock faces and awakening the forest from its frozen sleep. Silas worked the coffee grounds into his dented pot with practiced motions, his calloused hands moving through the ritual without conscious thought. A decade in these mountains had worn away the softer parts of him, leaving something as weathered and unyielding as the granite peaks themselves. His cabin stood in a small clearing, a testament to solitary craftsmanship, logs stacked and chinked tight against mountain winters, a stone chimney that drew true even in howling winds. It was a fortress against more than just weather. Settling on the rough-hewn porch step, Silas sipped the bitter brew and watched a hawk circle above the pines. No sound but wind and distant elk calls, no human voice to remind him of what he'd left behind, or what had driven him here. The coffee warmed his belly, but his eyes remained cold, scanning the tree line from old habit. A decade's isolation hadn't cured him of watchfulness. Some instincts, like some memories, refused to die. Silas flexed his right hand, feeling the familiar pull of scar tissue across his knuckles. Iron Boone, they'd called him. A name earned in blood during a feud that had branded him a beast and driven him from civilization. Most days he preferred the company of mountains to men. Mountains, at least, judged nothing and remembered less. But spring meant supplies running low. The bare pantry shelves and dwindling ammunition wouldn't replenish themselves. Silas grimaced at the thought of town, of watchful eyes and whispered stories. One quick trip, he decided, in and out before noon. The frontier town of Sweetwater Creek had grown since Silas's last reluctant visit. New clapboard buildings stretched along the muddy main street, and a freshly painted bank stood prominently on the corner, a beacon of civilization's advancing edge. Silas felt the stairs the moment he rode in, his mountain-bred stallion's hooves breaking the morning quiet. Women gathered children closer as he passed. Men's hands drifted toward weapons, then thought better of it. A decade of isolation hadn't dimmed their memories of Iron Boone. If anything, absence had only fed the legends. "Don't see you much," the storekeeper said when Silas ducked through the door, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. The man's eyes darted everywhere but Silas's face. "Don't need much," Silas replied, voice rough from disuse. He placed a list on the counter, scratched on a scrap of leather. "Just the supplies?" The storekeeper scanned the list, nodding. "Price has gone up since your last visit. Bank's been tightening credit all through the territory." Silas laid a small leather pouch on the counter. The gold dust inside spoke louder than words. Mountains might be unforgiving, but they occasionally revealed their treasures to patient men. While the storekeeper gathered his supplies, Silas stood with his back to the wall, watching the street through the dusty window. The townsfolk moved with purpose, but there was a tension in their shoulders, a wariness that seemed fresher than just his presence. A boy ran past, shouting to a companion, "Hurry up! They're starting the auction in the square." "What auction?" Silas asked, the words escaping before he could stop them. The storekeeper paused, uncomfortable. "Wynne couldn't pay his debts to the bank. Banker Fitz is auctioning his daughter to settle accounts." "Auctioning his daughter?" Silas's voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. "Marriage auction," the storekeeper clarified hastily. "Legal enough. Wynne died mysteriously last month, left his daughter Clara with nothing but debts to Fitz's bank." Something stirred in Silas, a feeling long buried under years of solitude. Before he could examine it, his boots were carrying him toward the town square, the supplies forgotten on the counter. The town square buzzed with morbid curiosity as Harold Snake Fitz stood on the wooden platform, his tailored suit and slick-oiled hair marking him as distinctly different from the dusty settlers gathered below. Beside him stood a young woman, her back straight despite the humiliation etched across her features. Clara Wynne was no frontier wildflower, but a cultivated rose, with educated eyes that burned with quiet defiance. Her simple dress was worn but clean, her hands delicate yet marked by recent work. She stared beyond the crowd, refusing to meet the calculating gazes that assessed her worth. "We begin the bidding for Miss Clara Wynne's hand in marriage," Fitz announced, his voice carrying the refined accent of Eastern money. "The opening bid is set at $200, the current value of her late father's outstanding debt to Fitz Banking and Land." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Few in the territory had that kind of cash, which was precisely Fitz's strategy. Silas watched from the edge of the gathering, something hot and forgotten awakening in his chest. "I'll open at 100, Fitz continued, with a cold smile. "A generous discount, considering the circumstances." Clara's jaw tightened, but her eyes remained fixed on the distant mountains, Silas's mountains, as if seeking escape. 150, called a balding rancher, his eyes crawling over Clara with undisguised interest. 175, countered the saloon owner, a man with hands too soft for honest work. Fitz's smile widened. 200 from Mr. Jenkins. Silas watched Clara's fingers curl into fists, her knuckles white with suppressed rage. 10 years since he'd felt anything stronger than the dull contentment of survival, yet something pulled him forward through the crowd, some forgotten instinct he couldn't name. "I haven't seen a woman in 10 years. Silas's voice cut through the bidding like a blade. The crowd parted as he approached the platform, their collective breath held. "I'll take this one." Clara's eyes snapped to his, the first time she'd looked directly at anyone, surprise replacing defiance for a flicker of a moment. "Mr. Boone," Fitz recovered quickly, though his smile had frozen. "This is a legal auction to settle legitimate debts. The current bid stands at—" "I said I'll take her." Silas climbed the steps to the platform, his movement deliberate as a mountain cat. He reached into his pocket and tossed the pouch of gold dust at Fitz's feet. "That cover it?" Fitz stared at the pouch, then at Silas's scarred face. Something passed between them, recognition of two predators with very different hunting grounds. "Well, Miss Wynne," Fitz said finally, his voice tight, "it seems you have a husband." Silas turned to Clara, whose expression had shifted to wary calculation. "Ready to leave?" he asked quietly. "Anywhere but here," she answered, her voice cultured but firm. As Silas led her from the platform, he felt Fitz's eyes boring into his back, promising this wasn't over. But for the first time in a decade, Silas had stepped into another's fate, altered the course of a life not his own. The solitude of his mountains suddenly seemed very far away. The mountain trail wound ever upward, narrowing as civilization fell away behind them. Silas rode slightly ahead, his stallion picking the path with practiced ease, while Clara's borrowed mare followed hesitantly. Neither rider had spoken more than a dozen words since leaving town, the silence broken only by hoofbeats and the occasional cry of a hunting bird. Clara studied the broad shoulders of the man who had just upended her life. Iron Boone. The name whispered in Sweetwater Creek with equal parts fear and fascination. The mountain hermit whose past violence had driven him into exile. His sun-darkened neck above his collar told of years lived outdoors, while the practiced way he scanned the surroundings spoke of a man accustomed to watching for threats. The spring air grew sharper as they climbed, carrying the bite of lingering winter. Clara pulled her threadbare shawl tighter, a movement not lost on her silent companion. "Cold?" Silas asked without turning, the word hanging between them like a test. "I'll manage," Clara replied, straightening her spine against the chill. Silas reined in his horse, turning in the saddle to regard her fully for the first time. His eyes, clear and gray as mountain water, assessed her with unnerving directness. "Didn't ask if you'd manage," he said, shrugging out of his heavy leather coat. "Asked if you're cold." He extended the coat with a gesture that brooked no argument. Clara hesitated, then accepted it, wrapping the oversized garment around her shoulders. It carried the scents of wood smoke, pine, and solitude. "Thank you, Mr. Boone." "Silas," he corrected, turning back to the trail. "Nobody calls me Mister up here." As they crested the final ridge, Clara's breath caught despite herself. Nestled in a protected hollow sat a sturdy log cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Behind it rose snow-capped peaks that seemed to pierce the very sky, while a clear stream rushed nearby, splitting to form a natural boundary around the small clearing. "That's your home?" she asked, unable to mask her surprise at its solid construction. Silas nodded once. "Ours now, I suppose." The words seemed to cost him. Acknowledgment of a change neither had fully processed. "For as long as you need it to be." The implication was clear. This arrangement was temporary, a necessity born of circumstance rather than choice. Clara nodded her understanding, relief and uncertainty warring within her. She had escaped Fitz's clutches, but at what cost to her future? And what price would her reluctant rescuer eventually demand? The cabin's interior revealed a decade of solitary male habitation, functional but Spartan. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its cooking hooks blackened from use. A rough-hewn table and single chair occupied the center, while a narrow bed covered in fur pelts stood in the corner. Shelves lined with preserved foods, ammunition, and a handful of well-worn books completed the inventory of Silas Boone's world. Clara stood just inside the door, taking measure of her new circumstance with a practical eye rather than dismay. She had expected worse. "Not much," Silas offered, watching her catalogue his possessions. "But it keeps the weather out." "It's more than many have," Clara replied, setting down her small bundle of belongings, all that remained of her former life. "You built this yourself?" Silas nodded, moving to stoke the banked fire. Had time. Clara removed his coat, folding it carefully before approaching the table. We should discuss terms, Mr. Silas. He turned from the fire, eyebrow raised. Terms? Of our arrangement. Clara's chin lifted slightly. We're strangers, bound by circumstance. Best to establish clear expectations. A ghost of something, perhaps amusement, flickered across Silas's weathered features. Been a while since I negotiated with anyone. Then I'll begin. Clara's voice gained confidence. I cook, clean, and maintain order. You provide protection and shelter. We present as married when necessary for appearances. And otherwise? Silas asked, studying her with those direct gray eyes. Otherwise, we stay out of each other's way. Clara met his gaze without flinching. I won't intrude on your solitude more than necessary. Silas considered this, then nodded slowly. Seems fair. He moved to a trunk near the bed, pulling out extra blankets and furs. You take the bed. I'll make do here. Clara watched as he efficiently arranged a sleeping space near the fire. His movements were economical, a man accustomed to solving practical problems without complaint. I can fashion a curtain, she offered, for privacy. Do what you need. Silas straightened, gesturing toward the pantry shelves. Food's there, not much variety, but it'll keep you fed. Water's from the stream out back. Outhouse is 50 paces east. Clara nodded, taking mental inventory. Thank you, she said quietly. For today. I know this isn't what you planned when you rode into town. Silas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Wasn't what you planned either, I expect. Their eyes held in a moment of unexpected understanding. Two lives derailed, now cautiously circling each other in the confined space of necessity. Morning brought routine. Silas splitting wood outside, while Clara organized the cabin's interior, each giving the other wide berth in their shared isolation. The silence between them was neither comfortable nor tense, simply vacant, like the space between distant stars. The pounding on the door shattered that careful equilibrium. Silas was inside in an instant, rifle in hand, motioning Clara behind him. Sheriff, he murmured, recognizing the pattern of knocks. He opened the door to reveal Sheriff Thomas Grant, a man whose badge seemed to weigh heavily on his sagging shoulders. Boone, he nodded, then tipped his hat slightly toward Clara. Mrs. Boone. Sheriff, Silas acknowledged, not correcting the address, but not inviting him in either. Coffee? Clara offered from behind Silas's shoulder, slipping into the role of wife with surprising ease. The sheriff shook his head. This isn't social. He pulled a folded document from his vest. Harold Fitz is challenging the validity of your arrangement. Says you can't just claim a woman at auction without proper documentation. Silas's expression hardened. Marriage is legal, witnessed by half the town. He's pushing for proof you're living as man and wife, the sheriff continued, uncomfortable with his own message. Says if it's just a ruse to keep her from paying debts, the auction results are void. Clara stepped forward, one hand resting lightly on Silas's arm in a gesture that appeared practiced despite being their first contact. Tell Mr. Fitz our arrangements are none of his concern, Sheriff. Sheriff Grant shifted uneasily. He's determined, Mrs. Boone. Says your father's death left loose ends he means to tie up. My father never touched spirits a day in his life, Clara said, her voice sharp with sudden emotion. Yet the coroner ruled he fell drunk from that bridge. Strange coincidence, wouldn't you say, Sheriff? The lawman's eyes darted away. I just enforce the law, ma'am. Don't make it. And whose law would that be? Silas asked quietly. The Territories or Fitz's? The sheriff had no answer for that. He handed Silas the document with visible relief at completing his task. He expects a response by week's end. After the sheriff departed, Clara and Silas stood in silence, the document between them like a serpent neither wished to touch. He murdered my father, Clara said finally, her composed facade cracking. My father discovered something in the bank's records. He was going to the territorial capital with evidence. She pulled a folded paper from her sleeve. The day before he died, he sent me this note to hide something important, but I never found what he meant. Silas studied her face, seeing the grief beneath her practical exterior for the first time. Fitz doesn't strike me as a man who leaves loose ends. No, Clara agreed, her eyes meeting his with newfound resolve. Which means we're both now in his ledger of unfinished business. Something shifted between them, a mutual recognition that their arrangement had suddenly become more than temporary convenience. They were bound now by a common enemy, a shared danger that made their isolated cabin feel less like sanctuary and more like the eye of an approaching storm. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating the table where Clara had arranged her father's documents in neat rows. Letters, receipts, and the cryptic final note lay organized by date, creating a paper trail of Benjamin Wynn's final weeks. He was methodical, Clara explained as Silas studied the materials. Kept records of everything. These are all I managed to save before Fitz's men cleared out our home. Silas nodded, seeing the pattern of a mind similar to Clara's, ordered, precise, attentive to detail. And this was his last message to you? He tapped the note with its hurried scrawl. Hide the ledger page. Trust no one. If anything happens, check the northwest corner post. Yes, Clara confirmed. But our house had no corner post, and I found nothing unusual at his office before Fitz's men arrived. Silas studied the dates on the documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. Your father was the bank's accountant. For 15 years, Clara nodded. He knew every transaction, every loan, every foreclosure. Her finger traced a pattern across several receipts. These properties were all foreclosed within months of each other. All had missed only 1 or 2 payments before sudden accidents befell their owners. Silas's expression darkened. And your father started asking questions. He mentioned discrepancies, Clara confirmed. Numbers that didn't align. She hesitated. Father never touched alcohol. The story about him falling drunk from the bridge is impossible. Silas rose, moving to a trunk in the corner. He returned with a worn leather journal. Been tracking game for years, he explained, opening to reveal meticulous notes on animal movements, weather patterns, and human activities observed from his mountain vantage. Tracking men isn't so different. Clara's eyes widened slightly at this glimpse into Silas's hidden depths. You were more than just a mountain man before, weren't you? Something guarded flickered across his features. Had another life. Doesn't matter now. It might, Clara pressed gently, if those skills help us understand what happened to my father. Silas studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Town doctor signed the death certificate? Doc Miller, Clara confirmed. He's been in Fitz's pocket for years. Then that's where we start. Silas closed the journal decisively. Town won't be expecting us back so soon. Might work to our advantage. Clara gathered the most crucial documents into a small leather pouch. If we find evidence of murder, 1 step at a time, Silas cautioned. But there was a new determination in his voice, the awakening of something long dormant. First, we learn what the doctor knows. As they prepared to ride, Clara noticed the subtle changes in Silas, his movements more purposeful, his eyes more alert. The hermit was becoming something else before her eyes, a transformation as fascinating as it was unexpected. Sweetwater Creek's reaction to their return was a mixture of surprise and wary curiosity. The couple from the auction now moved together through town, presenting the image of newlyweds on legitimate business. Yet whispers followed them, Iron Boone and his bought bride, the mountain beast and the banker's enemy. Doc Miller's office sat opposite the bank, a modest clapboard building with a faded medical symbol painted on the door. The physician himself was a slight man with perpetually stained fingers and the hollow eyes of someone who carried too many secrets. "Mrs. Wynne," he stammered upon seeing Clara, before hastily correcting himself. "Mrs. Boone, I mean, quite unexpected." "Dr. Miller," Clara acknowledged with cool formality. "We need to discuss my father's death certificate." The doctor's eyes darted to Silas, who had positioned himself casually against the door, effectively blocking any exit. "I've already filed the official report with the territorial office. Nothing to discuss." "That report claims Benjamin Wynne was intoxicated when he fell," Clara said, placing her father's abstinence pledge on the desk. "Signed and witnessed for 15 years, without a single lapse." "Evidence can be misleading," Miller replied, his collar suddenly seeming too tight. "I can only report what I find." "What you found, or what you were told to find?" Clara pressed. Silas shifted slightly, his voice low but carrying dangerous undercurrents. 5 deaths, 5 debt collections, same doctor's signature. Miller's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're implying." "Not implying anything," Silas interrupted calmly. "Stating facts. Men die, Fitz collects, you sign the papers." The doctor's eyes darted toward the window where the bank stood in clear view. "He owns my mortgage," he finally whispered, defeat crumpling his features. "Said he'd take everything if I didn't sign the reports as directed." "What really happened to my father?" Clara demanded, leaning forward. Miller's hands trembled. "Blunt force trauma to the back of the head before he went into the water. Wasn't a fall that killed him." "Murder," Clara breathed, confirmation of her worst suspicions squeezing her heart. "I have a family," Miller pleaded. "Fitz said it would be them next if I didn't cooperate." Silas's expression remained impassive, but his eyes had hardened to granite. Where would Benjamin Wynne have hidden evidence, something a bank accountant would consider safe? The doctor hesitated, then whispered, "Town Records Office has a false panel in the east wall. Old hiding place from Indian raid days. Benjamin helped me hide my real medical records there, the ones that show what really happened to all of them." Clara and Silas exchanged glances. "We were never here," Silas told the doctor as they prepared to leave. "It won't matter," Miller replied bleakly. "He has eyes everywhere. God help you both." Darkness provided their only cover as Silas worked the lock on the Town Records Office, his fingers moving with surprising dexterity for their size. Clara kept watch, her heart pounding in her throat as she scanned the empty street. "Where did you learn to open locks?" she whispered. "Before the mountains," Silas replied simply. "Another life." The lock clicked open under his ministrations, and he ushered her quickly inside. Oil lamps were too risky, so they worked by moonlight, filtering through dusty windows. The records office smelled of old paper and neglect, its shelves sagging under the weight of territorial history. "East wall," Clara murmured, running her fingers along the wooden paneling. "There must be a mechanism." Silas moved methodically, pressing and probing until a soft click rewarded his efforts. A small section of wall swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment. "Here," Clara breathed, pulling out a stack of papers. She shuffled through them quickly. "These are Doc Miller's true medical reports, and this—" She stopped, her breath catching as she unfolded a ledger page. "What is it?" Silas asked, keeping his voice low. "Bank records in my father's handwriting. Properties acquired after deaths, all purchased for a fraction of their value." Her finger traced a pattern on the page. "And look at these notations. They form a path. Properties along a specific route through the valley." Silas studied the markings. "Your father found a pattern." Clara nodded, excitement mixing with dread. "The northwest corner post. It wasn't a physical location. It was this corner of the ledger where he noted his suspicions." She pointed to a small notation. "Railroad Survey, 1868. Confidential." "Railroad," Silas muttered, understanding dawning. "Valley land would be worth—" "10 times its current value with a railroad coming through," Clara finished. "Fitz has been murdering property owners along the planned route, acquiring land that will make him rich when the railroad arrives." A floorboard creaked outside the office door. Silas motioned Clara to silence, extinguishing their lamp. Heavy footsteps passed by, the night watchman on his rounds. "We need to go," Silas whispered when the steps faded. "Take only what's essential." Clara carefully folded the ledger page and the most damning medical reports. As they slipped back into the night, the weight of their discovery hung heavy between them. They weren't just hiding from a ruthless banker anymore. They were gathering evidence against a calculating murderer. The Broken Spoke Saloon represented Silas's worst nightmare. Crowded, noisy, reeking of unwashed bodies and spilled whiskey. Yet Whiskey Sam, the establishment's owner, was their best chance at confirming what the document suggested. "A woman doesn't belong in here," Silas muttered as they paused outside the swinging doors. Clara adjusted the borrowed shawl covering her hair. "Neither does a mountain hermit. Yet here we are." The saloon fell into stunned silence as they entered together, conversations dying mid-sentence. Clara kept her head high, ignoring the stares as she followed Silas to the bar, where a barrel-chested man with a magnificent mustache regarded them with undisguised curiosity. "Whiskey Sam?" Silas inquired quietly. "Depends who's asking," the man replied, his eyes darting between them. "Need information about Benjamin Wynn's death," Silas said, placing a small gold nugget on the bar. Sam's eyes widened at the payment, but he shook his head. "Ain't wise asking questions about Mr. Fitz." "Wisdom didn't save my father," Clara interjected, her voice low but clear. Sam studied her face, recognition dawning. "Wynn's daughter." He glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Saw Fitz's men tampering with the bridge supports the day before your pa fell. Didn't think nothing of it until after." "You willing to say that publicly?" Silas pressed. "Not if I want to keep breathing," Sam scoffed. "And neither should you." He nodded toward a corner table where 2 hard-faced men watched their conversation with undisguised interest. "Fitz's hired guns. They're in here every night, making sure everybody remembers who runs this town." "What about the railroad?" Clara asked. "Is it really coming through the valley?" Sam's eyebrows shot up. "Where'd you hear that? That information's supposed to be secret until the land deals are complete." "That's all we needed to know," Silas said, straightening. "We appreciate your time." As they turned to leave, Sam caught Silas's sleeve. "Word's out you 2 are asking dangerous questions. Watch your backs on that mountain. Fitz's reach is longer than you think." They exited into the night air, both feeling the weight of unseen eyes following their departure. "We have enough to take to the territorial marshal," Clara said as they mounted their horses. Silas's expression was grim. Need to get back to the cabin first. Something tells me we're being followed. As if to confirm his suspicion, a rider detached from the shadows across the street, moving unhurriedly toward the bank. Their investigation had not gone unnoticed. The race to gather evidence had become a race for survival. I'll now proceed with Chapter 4, according to our blueprint. They discovered the survey markers at dawn, half hidden in the underbrush 50 yards from the cabin. Silas knelt to examine the wooden stakes, each branded with the initials CPRR, Central Pacific Railroad. "They've already surveyed our property," Clara said, her voice tight with realization. "The cabin sits directly in their planned route." Silas nodded grimly. "Makes sense why Fitz was so determined to acquire your father's debts, and why he's now fixated on this land." They followed the line of markers westward, discovering more stakes at regular intervals. Each bore recent tool marks and fresh rope ties, work completed within the past month. "My father mentioned railroad rumors," Clara recalled, as they examined a surveyor's map that had blown against a rock. "But nothing concrete. This was all done in secret." The partial map revealed a planned route connecting the territorial capital to mining operations in the north, with Sweetwater Creek designated as a major stop. Property along the route would increase exponentially in value once the railroad was announced publicly. "Every property on your father's list sits along this route," Silas observed. "Fitz has been systematically acquiring land through foreclosure or death." "And our cabin occupies a crucial junction point," Clara added, understanding dawning. "That's why he's so desperate to invalidate our marriage and reclaim this land." They stood in silence, the morning sun illuminating the valley below, a landscape soon to be transformed by iron rails and progress. What had been worthless mountain property a year ago would soon become the gateway to the territory's future. "We need to secure this evidence," Silas decided, "then confront the sheriff with everything we've found." Clara's expression was doubtful. "Do you trust Sheriff Grant not to be in Fitz's pocket as well?" "No," Silas admitted, "but he's our only legal recourse without traveling to the territorial capital." He carefully rolled the map, his movements deliberate. "And something tells me Fitz won't give us time for that journey." As they turned back toward the cabin, Silas suddenly tensed, dropping to a crouch. "Boot prints," he whispered, pointing to disturbed earth near the survey stake. "Too large for the surveyors. Someone else has been watching our movements." The realization sent a chill through them both. Their sanctuary was compromised. The mountain no longer held secrets. The sheriff's office was a simple log structure with barred windows and a hard-packed dirt floor. Sheriff Grant looked up from his desk with resignation as Silas and Clara entered, closing the ledger he'd been reviewing. "Figured you'd be coming," he said without preamble. Silas placed their evidence on the desk, the ledger page, medical reports, and survey map. "Benjamin Wynne was murdered to conceal Fitz's land scheme," he stated flatly. "He's been killing debtors to acquire property along the railroad route." Grant sighed heavily, not touching the documents. "And you expect me to arrest the most powerful man in the territory based on stolen papers and hearsay?" "These are official records," Clara countered. "My father's notations, Dr. Miller's true medical findings, survey maps proving the railroad's planned route." "I believe you," Grant said, surprising them both. "But belief won't stand against Fitz's judges and lawyers." "Man's killing people for profit," Silas growled. "And he owns the law in these parts," the sheriff replied, sliding a telegram across the desk. "Territorial officials have already verified Fitz's land deals as vital to regional development. His connections reach all the way to the capital." Clara studied the telegram with growing horror. They're complicit. They're businessmen, Grant corrected. Railroad means prosperity, taxes, growth. Nobody wants to look too closely at how the land was acquired. So you do nothing? Clara demanded. I'm warning you, aren't I? Grant met their eyes with genuine regret. That's all I can do. You start making noise, you'll be next. Accidents happen to folks who ask too many questions. Like Benjamin Wynne, Silas said quietly. The sheriff nodded slowly. Your best chance is to disappear. Take what you can carry and head north. Territory's big enough to get lost in. As they turned to leave, Grant added softly, They're watching your cabin. 2 men positioned on the ridge since yesterday. I'd approach from the east ravine if I were you. Silas paused at the door. Appreciate the warning, Sheriff. Don't thank me, Grant replied. Just trying to avoid more bodies in my jurisdiction. Outside, Clara and Silas mounted their horses, keeping their movements casual despite the urgency burning between them. The sheriff's right, Clara said quietly as they rode. We should leave. Silas's jaw tightened. Running won't stop Fitz. He'll just find other victims. We can take the evidence to federal authorities, Clara suggested. Evidence that passes through how many corrupt hands before reaching someone honest? Silas shook his head. No. We document everything first. Build a case too strong to ignore. The determination in his voice surprised them both. The mountain hermit, now fully committed to a fight he'd spent a decade avoiding. They approached the cabin with extreme caution, circling wide to reach the eastern ravine the sheriff had mentioned. Silas moved with practiced stealth, leading their horses through a stream to mask their tracks. 2 men on the ridge, he confirmed, gesturing toward barely visible shapes against the tree line, armed with rifles from the look of it. Waiting to ambush us when we return, Clara concluded. Silas nodded grimly. I'll circle behind them. You stay here with the horses. And if something goes wrong, Clara challenged. Then ride for the territorial border, Silas replied without hesitation. Don't look back. Clara's hand closed around his forearm. We face this together. I can shoot. Surprise flickered across his features. Your father teach you? He believed women should be able to protect themselves. Clara's voice held quiet determination. I'm not hiding while you risk your life. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Respect, perhaps even admiration. He nodded once. Stay low, follow my lead. They secured the horses and moved through the forest with deliberate care, using the terrain for cover. Silas pointed out signs as they went. Broken twigs, disturbed earth, a cigarette butt ground into the dirt. Hired guns, he whispered, not trackers, sloppy. They were 20 yards from the ambush position when a twig snapped under Clara's foot. The sound, though slight, was enough. A man's head turned in their direction. Run! Silas shouted, shoving Clara toward a fallen log as the first shot splintered bark inches from her head. The forest erupted in gunfire. Silas returned fire from behind a boulder, his shots methodical compared to the ambusher's wild barrage. Clara crouched behind the log, her borrowed revolver ready. A man crashed through the underbrush to her right, attempting to flank their position. Without hesitation, she fired, the bullet striking his shoulder. He cursed, stumbling backward. Silas! She called in warning as a second man appeared on their left. The exchange intensified, bullets chipping stone and wood around them. Silas moved with surprising agility for his size, keeping the attackers divided, never staying in one position long enough to become a target. Clara saw the moment everything changed. Silas rising to fire, the muzzle flash from the ridge, his body jerking backward as the bullet found its mark. He staggered, but remained standing, firing twice more before dropping to one knee. Go, he gasped, blood darkening his shirt. "Get to the horses." Instead, Clara crawled to his position, firing toward the ridge to provide cover. "Not without you," she insisted, helping him to his feet. Together they retreated, Silas weakening with each step, but still returning fire when necessary. The remaining attacker, seeing his companion wounded and outnumbered, finally withdrew. By the time they reached the horses, Silas was pale and unsteady. Clara helped him mount, then swung up behind him to secure his swaying form. "Cabin's not safe," he managed through gritted teeth. "I know a place," Clara replied, guiding the horse deeper into the mountain wilderness. "Hold on, Silas, just hold on." The abandoned trapper's hut was little more than a lean-to, reinforced with stone, but it offered shelter and remained unknown to Fitz's men. Clara eased Silas onto a bed of pine boughs, his breathing shallow, skin clammy with shock. "Need to see the wound," she said, gently cutting away his blood-soaked shirt. The bullet had torn through his upper shoulder, missing vital organs, but leaving a ragged exit wound. Clara worked methodically, cleaning the injury with water boiled over a small fire, applying herbs she'd gathered along the way. "Not your first time treating wounds," Silas observed weakly. "Frontier women learn necessity's skills," Clara replied, binding the injury with strips torn from her petticoat. "My mother was a healer before she passed." Silas watched her work, his normally guarded expression softened by pain and something else, a growing appreciation for the woman fate had thrust into his solitary existence. "Why didn't you run?" he asked as she finished the bandaging. "Would have been safer." Clara's hands stilled. "Because you didn't abandon me at that auction block," she answered simply. "Some debts can't be measured in dollars, Silas." Night fell as fever gripped him, his body fighting infection. Clara kept vigil, bathing his forehead with cool water, monitoring his breathing through the darkest hours. In his delirium, fragments of his past emerged. "Not a beast," he murmured, thrashing weakly. "Had no choice." "Shh," Clara soothed, wiping his brow. "You're safe now." His hand caught hers with surprising strength. "Was a killer once," he confessed, eyes momentarily clear. "That's why I left civilization." Clara didn't pull away, instead lacing her fingers with his. "We all have pasts, Silas. It's what we do with our futures that matters." His eyes closed again, but his grip remained. Something profound had changed between them, forged in blood and trust, tempered by shared danger. When dawn broke, Clara realized she'd slept with her head resting against his uninjured shoulder, their hands still entwined. The marriage of convenience had become something neither had anticipated, a partnership of equals, bound by something deeper than necessity or convenience. Silas awoke to silence and knew immediately something was wrong. 3 days had passed since the ambush, his wound healing enough to allow their cautious return to the cabin. Clara had been there when he'd fallen asleep by the fire, working on organizing their evidence for a journey to the territorial capital. Now the cabin stood empty, the morning light revealing signs of struggle that turned his blood cold. "Clara?" he called, knowing already she wouldn't answer. The table where she'd worked was overturned, papers scattered. Her shawl lay crumpled by the door. Most telling was the thin line of blood trailing across the floorboards. Not enough to suggest fatal injury, but clear evidence of resistance. Silas moved through the cabin with methodical precision, reading the signs of what had happened. Multiple boot prints marked the dirt floor, at least 3 men. Clara had fought. An overturned chair, a bloodied fireplace poker. They'd taken her alive, but not gently. Beneath an upended water bucket, he found a folded paper that had escaped the intruder's notice. The handwriting was unmistakably Fitz's, elegant, educated, and coldly precise. The deed for the mountain property in exchange for the woman. Noon tomorrow at the bank. Come alone or she dies. No law, no witnesses. Silas stared at the note, a decade of carefully constructed isolation crumbling around him. 10 years avoiding any soul who might need him. Now, the one person he couldn't lose was gone. He moved with swift purpose, gathering weapons and supplies. The man who emerged from the cabin bore little resemblance to the hermit who had entered it weeks before. Iron Boone had returned, eyes hard as granite, movements precise as a predator's. At the edge of the clearing, he paused to study tracks leading down the mountain. 3 horses, one carrying double weight, Clara and her captor. They'd headed directly for town. Silas checked his rifle, the familiar weight of it shifting from tool to weapon in his hands. "I'm coming, Clara," he murmured to the empty forest. "Hold on." The mountain man turned his back on a decade of solitude and descended toward civilization, intent not on retreat this time, but on war. Sweetwater Creek fell silent as Silas rode down the main street, townsfolk scattering like leaves before a storm. He made no attempt at stealth or subterfuge. This was not the reluctant visitor of weeks past, but a man transformed by purpose, every line of his body promising violence. "The beast of Iron Canyon comes to town," someone whispered as he passed. "Killed 6 men in one night, they say," another voice added. Silas ignored them, his focus absolute. "Today it might be 7, he muttered, eyes fixed on the bank building ahead. The saloon's swinging doors parted as he approached, Martha Jenkins emerging with surprising boldness. The general store widow walked directly into his path, her expression grave but determined. "Mr. Boone," she said quietly, "a word, if you please." Silas reined in, his patience razor-thin. "Not the time, ma'am." "It's exactly the time," she insisted, glancing meaningfully at the alley beside her store. "About your wife." Something in her tone cut through his single-minded focus. He dismounted, following her into the shadowed passage between buildings. "They brought her in before dawn," Martha said without preamble. "She was injured, but fighting. Fitz has her in the bank's upper room." "You've seen her?" Silas demanded. Martha nodded. "I bring Fitz his meals." Clara managed to whisper that you shouldn't come alone. "He plans to kill you both regardless of any exchange." Silas absorbed this, unsurprised. "Appreciate the information, but this doesn't concern you, Mrs. Jenkins." "Doesn't it?" Martha's eyes hardened. "My husband owned the largest ranch in the valley before his accident last year. Benjamin Wynne was helping me prove it was murder." She pulled a folded paper from her sleeve. "This is a map of the bank's interior. Clara isn't the only one Fitz has wronged in this town." Silas studied the woman with new understanding. "How many others?" "Enough," Martha replied grimly. "We've been waiting for someone with the courage to stand against him." "I'm not here to lead a revolution," Silas stated flatly. "Just want Clara back." "Might take a revolution to get her," Martha countered. "Doc Miller's waiting at my store with others who've lost family to Fitz's schemes. You're not alone in this fight, Mr. Boone, not anymore." Silas looked down the street toward the bank, calculating odds and options. A decade of isolation had taught him self-reliance, but it had also taught him limitations. One man against Fitz's hired guns was suicide, and would doom Clara as well. 1 hour, he decided. Gather whoever's willing at your store, but understand, anyone who stands with me might not walk away. Martha nodded solemnly. "Some fights are worth the risk, Mr. Boone." "We'll be ready." As she hurried away, Silas felt the weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders, not just for Clara, but for an entire community that had found in him an unlikely champion. The back room of Martha's General Store had become an impromptu war council. Men and women whose lives had been shattered by Harold Fitz gathered around a table where Silas had spread the bank floor plans. "Fitz has at least 6 hired guns," Doc Miller reported, his earlier cowardice replaced by grim determination. 3 inside the bank, others patrolling the street. "I'm tired of signing death certificates for murdered men," the doctor added, meeting Silas's gaze directly, "and tired of living in fear." Silas nodded, then turned to Whiskey Sam. "Your saloon has a clear view of the bank's rear entrance?" "Clear as day," the barkeeper confirmed. "And I've got a greener shotgun that'll discourage unwanted visitors." Others stepped forward. A blacksmith whose brother had died in a suspicious mine collapse, a former deputy dismissed for asking too many questions, widows and sons of Fitz's victims. Each brought information, weapons, or simply the courage of the desperate. "We'll need distraction here," Silas indicated the front entrance, while a smaller group enters through the loading dock. "Main priority is securing Clara. Secondary is Fitz himself." "And the evidence?" Martha asked. "The ledgers proving his crimes?" "Office safe, most likely," Silas replied. "We'll need Ezekiel Turner for that." The room fell silent. Turner was Fitz's former assistant, dismissed months ago under suspicious circumstances. "Turner's been drinking himself to death at my place," Whiskey Sam offered. "Claims Fitz forced him to falsify documents." "Get him," Silas ordered. "Sober or not, we need what he knows." While they waited, Silas continued outlining the plan, assigning positions with the precision of a man well-versed in strategic thinking. His quiet authority surprised even himself. The solitary hermit transformed into a leader of men. When Ezekiel Turner arrived, bleary-eyed but coherent, he brought unexpected gifts. The combination to Fitz's safe and detailed knowledge of the bank's security. "Second floor, east wing," Turner confirmed. 2 guards at all times, Miss Wynn's being kept in the private meeting room. "Guard weaknesses?" Silas pressed. "Rotation at midnight," Turner replied. 2-minute window with minimal coverage. "That's when we move," Silas decided, checking his pocket watch. 4 hours from now. As the meeting concluded and tasks were assigned, Martha approached Silas privately. "The town calls you beast," she said quietly. "But I see a good man doing what's necessary." Silas checked his weapons methodically, his expression unreadable. "They call me a beast," he finally said. "Tonight, I'll show them why." Yet beneath the cold preparation for violence, something profound had shifted. The man who had fled human connection now stood at the center of a community united by purpose. The irony wasn't lost on him. It had taken losing Clara to truly understand what she had awakened in him. The abandoned livery stable on the edge of town provided perfect cover for final preparations. Lantern light threw long shadows across the walls as Ezekiel Turner spread detailed floor plans of the bank building across a weathered tack table. "Fitz's office is here," Turner indicated, his hands steadier now that purpose had replaced despair. "Safe behind the painting of San Francisco Harbor. The evidence ledgers documenting all transactions are kept there." Silas studied the layout, memorizing escape routes and choke points. "And Clara?" "Here." Turner pointed to a small room adjacent to the main office. It was designed as a private meeting space for wealthy clients. 1 door, 1 window overlooking the alley. "Guards?" Silas pressed. 2 at the stairs, 1 outside her door. They rotate every 4 hours. Turner's finger traced the patrol route. "Most dangerous are these 2, brothers from Texas, former Army scouts. The others are just hired guns with no particular loyalty. Martha Jenkins arrived with a bundle of clothes. Bank clerk uniforms, she explained, for those entering through the front. Doc Miller added his contribution, a small bottle of brown liquid. Laudanum. 2 drops in a drink will make a man sleepy. 4 will render him unconscious. What about the safe? The blacksmith asked. Those walls are 6 inches of solid steel. Turner's expression tightened. I was Fitz's assistant for 3 years. I know the combination. I also know which documents prove he orchestrated 7 murders for land acquisition. Why help us? Silas asked directly. You worked for him. Turner met his gaze, shame and determination warring in his bloodshot eyes. My signature is on documents I knew were forged. I helped build his empire of theft and murder because I was weak. His hands trembled slightly. Miss Wynn's father tried to warn me before Fitz had him killed. I've been drowning my guilt ever since. Silas nodded once, recognizing genuine remorse. Midnight, he confirmed, checking his watch. Everyone knows their positions? Around the circle, grim faces nodded. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Create diversions at multiple points, infiltrate during guard rotation, secure Clara and the evidence, neutralize Fitz. Remember, Silas cautioned, Fitz expects me alone at noon tomorrow. Our advantage is surprise. If anything goes wrong, focus on getting Clara out. The evidence is secondary. The evidence is justice for everyone he's killed, Martha objected. Justice won't matter if we're dead, Silas replied flatly. Clara comes first. As the group dispersed to their assigned positions, Whiskey Sam approached Silas with a Winchester rifle. This belonged to Benjamin Wynn, he said quietly. Seems fitting it should help free his daughter. Silas accepted the weapon, testing its weight and balance. Another piece of the past returning to shape the future. We'll get both, Doc Miller said with unexpected conviction. The girl and the evidence. Town deserves justice. Silas nodded, hoping the doctor's newfound courage would survive the night ahead. As he made his final preparations, he realized how completely his world had transformed in mere weeks, from absolute solitude to the center of a community's fight for survival. The elegant prison of Fitz's bank offered Clara little comfort despite its fine furnishings. Her wrists were raw from testing the ropes that bound her to the heavy oak chair, and the cut above her eye had finally stopped bleeding. Outside her door, a guard shifted position, boot heels clicking on polished floors. Clara had not been idle in captivity. Through careful observation, she had mapped the guard rotations, noted which men were careful and which were careless. The younger guard, barely 20, with nervous hands and eager eyes, had unwittingly revealed the midnight change when he'd mentioned looking forward to sleep. More valuable was the letter opener she'd managed to work free from the desk during a brief moment when they'd moved her to change the ropes. Now hidden in the folds of her skirt, it offered a slim hope if an opportunity presented itself. The door opened, and Harold Fitz entered with his customary elegant menace. His tailored suit and manicured hands spoke of wealth and refinement, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator. "Your mountain man hasn't appeared yet, my dear," he observed, pouring himself a brandy from a crystal decanter. "Perhaps he values that worthless land more than your company, after all." "Mr. Boone is a very determined individual," Clara replied evenly, revealing nothing of her thoughts. "So am I." Fitz smiled thinly. "The deed will be signed tomorrow, with or without your cooperation. Your father was equally stubborn, right until the end." Clara controlled her expression with effort. "Perhaps you'd like to explain your plans for the railroad while we wait." since I'll be dead either way, according to your men." Surprise flickered across Fitz's features before his mask of control returned. "You've been quite thorough in your investigation. Your father would be proud." He sipped his brandy. "But it changes nothing. Progress requires vision and sacrifice. The weak make way for the strong." "Is that how you justify murder?" Clara asked, buying time as she worked the rope against the chair's rough edge. "Economic philosophy?" "I prefer to think of it as natural selection," Fitz replied, examining his manicured nails. "The railroad means civilization, Miss Wynne. Those who couldn't see its value deserved their fate." A commotion in the outer office interrupted their conversation. Fitz moved to the door, irritation crossing his features. "Watch her," he instructed the guard before stepping out. The moment the door closed, Clara renewed her efforts against the rope, feeling the fibers beginning to give. Through the window she caught a glimpse of movement in the street below, shadows moving with purpose, not chance. Hope surged through her. Silas had not abandoned her. But neither would she wait passively for rescue. By the time help arrived, she intended to be an active participant in her own liberation. The letter opener slid into her palm as the ropes finally gave way. Now she would wait for the night-wrapped Sweetwater Creek in concealing shadows as Silas led the assault team through back alleys toward the bank. The imposing structure loomed against the star-filled sky, its windows glowing with lamplight despite the late hour. "Guards on the roof," whispered the former deputy, gesturing toward a silhouette visible against the moonlight. Silas nodded, signaling the diversionary team to take position. The blacksmith and 3 others would create a distraction at the saloon, a brawl spilling into the street to draw attention from the bank's rear entrance. "Remember," Silas murmured to his companions, "we move on my signal, not before." Martha Jenkins and Doc Miller would approach from the front, posing as clients with an after-hours emergency requiring access to their safety deposit box. Whiskey Sam and his shotgun covered the alley, while Turner prepared to open the safe once they secured the upper floor. As they took their positions around the bank, Silas caught a flicker of movement at an upstairs window, Clara's silhouette briefly visible against the glass. His heart tightened at the sight. She was alive, alert, and from what he could see, preparing herself for what was to come. "She's signaling," Martha whispered, pointing to the way Clara's hand moved deliberately at the window. "3 guards," Silas translated, recognizing the counting gesture. "She's letting us know the opposition." The respect in his voice was unmistakable. Even in captivity, Clara remained a formidable partner, not a passive victim awaiting rescue. Checking his pocket watch, Silas confirmed the time, 11:58. The guard change would begin in 2 minutes, creating their window of opportunity. "On my signal," he reminded the others, his voice barely audible. The distant church bell began to toll midnight, its sonorous tones rolling across the sleeping town. With the first chime, Silas nodded to the diversionary team. By the third, shouts erupted from the saloon, followed by the crash of breaking furniture. Guards stationed at the front of the bank turned toward the commotion, their attention momentarily diverted. Silas caught Clara's eye through the window and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Her responding gesture confirmed she understood. The rescue had begun. "Now," Silas breathed, and the carefully orchestrated assault moved into action. The mountain man who had spent a decade avoiding human connection now led a community into battle, his isolation replaced by purpose and partnership. As they approached the bank's rear entrance, Silas glimpsed Clara preparing her own resistance within, and in that moment their separate plans aligned into a single, unified strategy. The time for reckoning had arrived. The bank's rear door yielded to the blacksmith's tools with surprising ease, allowing Silas and 3 men to slip inside like shadows. Upstairs, the diversionary team had drawn 2 guards away from their posts, leaving only 1 man outside Clara's door. "Which way?" Silas whispered to Turner, who pointed toward a narrow servant's staircase. They ascended silently, weapons ready. At the top, Silas peered around the corner to see a burly guard leaning against the wall outside Clara's room, looking bored and inattentive. Silas signaled to the others to wait, then stepped into the hallway alone, his movement deliberately casual. "Evening," he said, causing the guard to jerk upright in surprise. "How did you—" The man never finished his question as Silas closed the distance between them with explosive speed, driving his fist into the guard's throat before he could shout a warning. The guard crumpled silently. Silas quickly bound and gagged the unconscious man, then tested Clara's door. Locked, as expected. He was preparing to force it when a soft clicking sound came from inside. The door opened to reveal Clara, a bloodied letter opener in her hand and fierce determination in her eyes. "You're late," she whispered, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Got held up," Silas replied, relief flooding through him at the sight of her alive and fighting. Their reunion was interrupted by shouts from the front of the bank. The other guards had discovered the intruders. Gunfire erupted from below as Whiskey Sam's shotgun announced the assault team's presence. "Fitz?" Silas asked urgently. "Office at the end of the hall," Clara answered, already moving in that direction. "The evidence is in his safe." They advanced together, Turner and the others falling in behind them. The hallway ahead remained clear. Their diversion was working. When they reached Fitz's office, they found the banker frantically stuffing documents into a valise, his composure shattered by the unexpected attack. He whirled at their entrance, a derringer appearing in his manicured hand. "Don't be foolish, Fitz," Silas warned, his rifle trained on the banker's chest. "You're the fools," Fitz snarled, his cultured veneer cracking to reveal the predator beneath. "I have judges, politicians, business partners. You think your frontier justice means anything against that power?" "Open the safe, Turner," Clara directed, keeping her attention on Fitz. As Turner moved toward the painting concealing the safe, Fitz fired his derringer in desperation. The shot went wide, splintering the wooden doorframe. Before he could reach for another weapon, Silas was upon him, disarming the banker with ruthless efficiency. "The ledgers show everything," Clara told Fitz as Turner worked the safe combination. "Every murder, every theft, every forged document." "You're nothing but a beast, Boone," Fitz spat, blood trickling from his split lip. "We both know what you really want to do." Silas's hand tightened, the urge to end Fitz's life a tangible force. The man had murdered Clara's father, threatened her life, sent killers after them both. Justice in the frontier often came from the barrel of a gun. Then he felt Clara's hand on his arm, a gentle pressure that spoke volumes. Their eyes met in silent communication. "I was a beast," Silas acknowledged, his voice steady. "Now I'm the law you couldn't buy." Below, the gunfire had ceased, replaced by the sounds of victory as the townspeople secured the bank. Turner emerged from behind the painting with a leather-bound ledger and a stack of documents. "It's all here," he confirmed. "Every transaction, every murder, every land deal connected to the railroad." Clara took the evidence with careful hands, her father's work finally complete. "This is over, Mr. Fitz," she said quietly. "Not through violence, but through truth." Dawn painted the eastern sky as the townspeople gathered outside the bank, watching as Sheriff Grant, finally freed from Fitz's influence, led the banker and his captured men toward the jail. The evidence recovered from the safe lay spread across a table for all to see. Irrefutable proof of murder and corruption. 7 murders, the sheriff announced, holding up the ledger for the crowd to see. All for land along the railroad route. Telegraphs already been sent to the territorial marshal. Fitz stood in chains, his elegant appearance now disheveled, his arrogance curdled into impotent rage. "This changes nothing," he insisted. "My associates will have me released within days." "Not with these," Clara countered, presenting the additional documents Turner had recovered. "Correspondence between you and territorial officials, detailing bribes, threatening letters, orders for murder disguised as business transactions." "The territorial governor himself will be implicated," Turner added. "No one will risk their career to save you now." Fitz's eyes narrowed as he looked from Clara to Silas. "You think this ends with me? Men like me own this territory. There will be others." "Not any more," Silas replied with quiet certainty. As Fitz was led away, Martha Jenkins approached Clara and Silas. "Benjamin would be proud," she said, squeezing Clara's hand. "You've given this town back its future." The townspeople began the process of reclaiming what had been stolen. Property deeds were returned, falsified debts canceled, truth restored where lies had reigned. Through it all, Clara and Silas worked together, their partnership now cemented by shared struggle and victory. When the initial chaos settled, they found themselves alone on the bank's front steps, watching as Sweetwater Creek awakened to its first day of freedom. "What happens now?" Clara asked softly. Silas gazed toward the distant mountains that had been his refuge for so long. "Cabin's quiet," he observed. "Too quiet now, I think." "Are you suggesting we stay in town?" Clara's voice held careful neutrality. "Maybe there's a middle path," Silas suggested. "Close enough for company when we want it." "And far enough for privacy when we don't," Clara finished, a smile warming her eyes. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining with the ease of long familiarity rather than their few weeks of acquaintance. What had begun as a reluctant rescue had transformed into something neither had sought, but both now treasured. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, not a hasty auction or arrangement of convenience, but a deliberate choice celebrated by the entire town. Sweetwater Creek had transformed alongside its unlikely heroes, the shadows of fear replaced by communal purpose. Clara wore a simple dress adorned with wildflowers gathered from the mountain meadows, while Silas had traded his buckskins for clean black trousers and a new shirt. They spoke their vows beneath the old oak in the town square, the same spot where they had first encountered each other under very different circumstances. "Never thought I'd see Iron Boone settling down," Whiskey Sam commented to Doc Miller as they watched the celebration afterward. "Iron and Star," the doctor corrected, nodding toward the newlyweds. Fitting names for 2 people who changed everything. The name stuck, Iron and Star Boone, the reluctant hermit and the banker's enemy who had forged something unbreakable from necessity and danger. They built their new home halfway between town and wilderness, a sturdy cabin overlooking Sweetwater Creek, but within sight of Silas's beloved mountains. Clara established a small school, while Silas's tracking skills found new purpose in guiding survey teams and settlers. On a crisp autumn evening, they sat together on their porch, watching as the setting sun turned the distant peaks to gold. Clara's head rested against Silas's shoulder, his arm wrapped comfortably around her. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The solitude?" Silas considered the question, his gaze taking in the cabin, the valley below, and the woman beside him. "Spent 10 years hiding from people," he finally replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Now I can't imagine life without them." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing, iron and star, strength and light, together forging a future neither could have imagined alone. "The mountains will always be there," Clara said softly, understanding his unspoken thoughts. "But now we have something worth coming home to," Silas finished, the last of his isolation melting away like snow in spring sunshine. From a marriage of necessity had come one of choice. From danger had come strength. From two broken paths had come a single road forward. Iron and star, once disparate elements now inseparable, their story becoming legend in a territory where such tales were currency, inspiration, and ultimately legacy.